Good evening and welcome to Psychedelic Healing. This is Sonia Cotto, your host. I am a nurse anesthesiologist and mental health advocate here to interview a wonderful new author, Madison Margolin. She is a journalist covering psychedelics and spirituality. She is the recent author of Exile and Ecstasy, Growing Up with Ram Dass and Coming of Age in the Jewish Psychedelic Underground. She is also the host of the Be Here Now Network Set and Setting podcast, as well as the co-founder of both Double Blind Magazine and the Jewish Psychedelic Summit. With a master's from Columbia Journalism School and a bachelor's in rhetoric and linguistics from UC Berkeley, Madison has traveled all over the world, from California through India, Israel, Palestine, exploring the role of entheogens in religion, health, and conflict resolution. With a decade's worth of experience covering psychedelics, cannabis, and religion, spirituality, Madison's work has been featured in multiple news outlets, New York Times, Forbes, Rolling Stones, you name it, she's been in there. She offers classes and workshops and consultings on the topic of Judaism, psychedelics, and is presented at conferences like SXSW, Horizons, the Perspectives of Psychedelics, and the Association of Alternative News Media, and more. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm so happy to have you. And I was actually very lucky to have met you at this weekend's conference here in Miami for Wonderland Microdose, a psychedelic conference. So it was nice we got to chat earlier.
Yeah, it's so rare that I meet my podcast, colleagues here.
All right. Yeah, it was. I was like, wait a second. Margolin? Wait, I know her. And then I think your friend interrupted your conversation. So sorry about that, but it was nice meeting you ahead of time. I would actually go ahead and usually I like to go ahead and ask on how you first got into psychedelics. But, after reading your book, you really were kind of born into it. So at what age really were you more, I guess, aware of the psychedelics and your experience, within the family?
Probably high school, I became aware of it, I think. Maybe middle school. In middle school, we had DARE, Drug Abuse Resistance Education, which was, supposed to keep kids off drugs.
Yeah.
And so I think I was somewhat exposed to the concept at that age. I mean, I grew up in like a very psychedelic household, but it's not like my parents were attributing the culture of the house to psychedelics to such young kids, even though my dad always smelled like pot smoke. I remember my mom would tell me stories about like doing mescaline or angel dust or whatever. In angel dust is PCP, a chemical cousin of ketamine. But anyways, she would tell me stories about doing these drugs when she was, living in upstate New York or in the village. And, she talked about one time where she like almost walked off a cliff while she was on acid. And so I knew that my mom especially had all of these psychedelic experiences. My dad, on the other hand, is like much more of just like a weed, like a stoner. Like he's way more into weed than anything else. Though I also know that he's, done psychedelics. But yeah, I became aware of it more explicitly in high school. I started to realize that, Ram Dass, who was a family friend, had this psychedelic background. And I got really interested in psychedelics, as a teenager. I started reading, I read Aldous Huxley. I was really interested in music and, again, as being like a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, with a crush on Jim Morrison or something like that. I was like, okay, like, what's he all about? And again, just through the music that I was listening to and the music that my parents also exposed me to really made me aware of psychedelics as substances and beyond just the culture that I was already exposed to.
Yeah, I think a lot of us were experienced at DARE. I actually was just very afraid of all psychedelics. I think I always remember LSD makes your brain bleed. Don't touch it. So it definitely worked on my end. So, and to many others. When was it that you first experienced medicine?
I was 18 when I first did mushrooms. I had read a lot about them before. Like I said, I had read Aldous Huxley. I did a whole research paper on psychedelics my first semester of college at Berkeley. And so I was like, okay, well, now I've gotten all the information, reading Timothy Leary and Ram Dass and all sorts of like historical accounts and kind of accounts inspired by psychedelics and so forth. And I was like, okay, now I really want to try it. And so I was with two friends and who also had never done mushrooms before. And my older sister was our trip sitter. And also she was joined by the family medical marijuana doctor who also had a lot of psychedelic experience. And we went to Venice Beach and it was just perfect first mushroom trip.
Wow. That's beautiful. I love that. How is that? Well, so that was your first one. What is your, I guess, how, because the book that you wrote is so beautiful. I am so amazed I actually want to do more research how you kind of linked psychedelics with spirituality and like the different culture and different events that you actually regularly hold in the Jewish religion. How did you actually find that? Like, how did you discover its connection?
Yeah, I mean, that first mushroom trip, I always kind of rebelled against my parents and their philosophies. So, when their philosophy is be here now because they're friends with Ram Dass, my rebellion is fuck that. And
Right.
So my first mushroom trip, I remember I was like sitting on the sand, like watching the sunset and being like, oh, be here now. Like, I get it. And I just like had never felt that in any sort of embodied way before. And it really kind of made me appreciate a lot more of where I was coming from and like what my parents were trying to instill in me and what Ram Dass's whole trip was about. So I knew very early on from my first psychedelic experience that it was really sacred. The idea that like people were doing them at parties and, again, I went to Berkeley, like there was psychedelics everywhere a lot. I was like, I couldn't imagine like tripping in a kind of party environment, even though eventually that also happened. So I knew it was sacred. I always thought of it as very special. I'd always like intuitively like journal beforehand and journal after. And like, I was doing a lot of like psychedelic practice that now is distilled into like best practices and harm reduction. And like I was just doing that anyway, because that's how I put the experience in such high esteem. But when I was in journalism school and I was reporting in the Hasidic community in Brooklyn, because every student had to cover a different ethnic community. And because I'm Jewish and also was one of only 2 Jews in the class, they're like, you're going to have access to the world's most insular religious community. So I met people from there who were doing psychedelics. They were like sort of negotiating their relationship to ultra orthodoxy. But I said to myself, how could someone coming from such a strong religious background or orientation not have that factor into their psychedelic trips? Having, knowing myself that like psychedelics magnify whatever's going on inside you. So that just got me really fascinated about whether you could really, have intersectionality between Jewish and psychedelic consciousness.
No, that's so interesting. I as I'm reading it, I couldn't believe how, and you worded it, and it was such an easy read on how it was just so dual and worked so well just together, So it wasn't until, so you kind of have been back and forth, right? From California to New York to Israel, just kind of those 3 spots were just rotating through. So most of that was just in New York once you started your master's. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what was one of probably your most profound religious experiences in New York when you actually got into the group? Because I know you kind of worked your way and you found the psychedelic group amongst the religious cohort.
Yeah, I'd say it was twofold. I mean, I really started to connect more to Jewish music through ayahuasca, because in the ayahuasca ceremonies, people were using nigunam, which are sort of like old Jewish tunes, as the music, as the medicine music. I didn't grow up with that music in a way where like I know the words and all of that, but I just knew it. Like they say that ayahuasca is like ancestor medicine, and it's granted like my ancestors are not the stewards of ayahuasca, right? Like I'm not coming from like a South American indigenous background, but it did sort of connect me on and ancestral level to my own roots. And I feel like I said, like my brain doesn't necessarily know those songs or the words to the songs, but like my soul like definitely knows those songs. And like even as I was hearing them probably for the first time in certain scenarios, I was like, this is really familiar. Like I know this. So that was one thing that just like opened me up to, and you know, so much of Judaism is in the musical tradition, and you can sort of identify a community based on how they sing and their style and what, you know, what songs are popular and this and that. And so it just kind of, again, gave me another level. And, you know, there's multitudes of ways to connect Jewishly, but that was another one. And then another thing that I experienced was being invited to these sort of psytrance psychedelic festivals upstate in the Catskills over Shabbat, which is the Jewish Sabbath, and just experiencing, you know, that container of sacred time, you know, as it's referred to in religious writings, in nature, you know, in this like very party environment, but also in a really, you know, with people coming from the Hasidic world, like there's something felt really traditional and beautiful about it in a way that I hadn't necessarily experienced, you know, among people who were not raised so observantly. So it was really blending a lot of things that I loved, which was just like, you know, like the soul of Yiddish culture.
Yeah, that must have been an amazing experience. And I feel like, you know, as you were going from, you know, I know in the book you discuss about wanting to go to New York and then being in New York and being called, you know, back to California or then being called to Israel. Did you ever really find, I felt like you were truly trying to find your home. Did you finally find it?
It's in progress. I mean, no, yes and no. Like, I definitely, you know, LA will always be home. You know, like that's where my parents are, my siblings. But I do feel really split down the middle with Israel and New York, and still trying to reconcile that one.
How long? When was the last time you were living in Israel?
A couple weeks ago.
God, I'm so sorry for everything that's if I could reach over and hug you, I would. I'm so sorry. Wow. And are you still in communication with anyone there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of like my really close friends are there, so I talk to them all the time, and yeah, everyone's is trying to live. I guess you could say that across the board.
Just trying to survive. I'm so sorry about that.
Because of the war, I had a work event to go to, and I conveniently already had a ticket booked, so I was able to get out like a little bit after the war started. So yeah.
Okay, so it was just a coincidence that you were just there short term. Okay, I'm glad that might be another trauma to have to survive through. Although you're living through that as well now, so
yeah, it's a weird moment. I think, yeah, in both places.
Yeah, definitely. You've not only written this book and then had this experience, being able to tie your experiences with Ram Dass. He is an idol to very many. And so how did you really, I guess, how is your memory, or what is your memory of Ram Dass? And I guess you knew him before he was Ram Dass, right?
Not before, because he took on this spiritual name Ram Dass, I think in the 70s or 60s.
Oh, okay.
But, I knew him as like one of my dad's friends, and less as this spiritual figure. He's, people talk about him as like Baba Ram Dass, but he was just, like I said, like my dad's buddy. I didn't think anything of it. Like I was really embarrassed about my parents' antics. Like I thought it was really weird that all these Jewish people had Hindu names and, walked around in robes and shit. And not all,
right.
I'd wear like a flannel and just like be normal. But, a lot of the time it was like everyone smells like weed and there's incense and there's like pictures of Hindu deities. And it's like, wait, are you guys actually Hindu? Like you're Jewish? What's going on? And they call themselves Hindus.
Hindus. Oh, very creative. Nice.
Yeah. So there's that. And Ram Dass, like, I just remember him just being like present, like here and there when he would visit or come to town or whatever, stay by my dad's or come over for dinner. there was one time where my mom took us to visit him in Hawaii, and I was fighting with my mom, and I had this thing where I would like scratch my cheek with my middle finger, and as a way of like being disrespectful and flipping her off. And so of course she like told Ram Dass, like she told on me, and because he's, therapist after all, like he can deal with our problems when we come to visit him.
Exactly.
And at the end of it, he didn't really care. He just like thought it was funny. But at the end, or he was like, "Why'd you do that?" I don't know. I was honestly really embarrassed and shy and just ashamed about it. At the end of the visit, Ram Dass was saying goodbye to us, and he was like, says goodbye, and he waves his cheek and he scratches his cheek with his middle finger, just to like back at me. And it was just like, I don't know, such a sweet moment in a way. And like everyone has these super spiritual Ram Dass stories, and mine is getting flipped off by Ram Dass. So
yeah, I think that was a chapter in your book.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Nice. Spirit getting flipped off by a spiritual guru. Nice. So I want to kind of go and transition into another project that you actually have, because you actually were co-founder of Double Blind Magazine, which is an amazing magazine. Actually, my clinic already has a subscription to it, and we get it delivered regularly. So when did that come about?
Yeah, and I guess 2019, if I recall, my co-founder kind of had the idea for a psychedelic magazine while she was meditating, and right after called me and said, "Hey, do you want to start a psychedelic magazine?" I'm like, okay. And I don't think either one of us really like knew what we were getting ourselves into. It was like an idea for like an artsy magazine, and then we ended up getting connected to Zoe Wilder and started getting a lot of attention for it, and doing like, got a social media person. And before we knew it, we were like running a startup media company. Like I'm not working full time with Double Blind anymore, but I do like, I'm supportive of what's going on. And I really, there's a lot of good stuff going on with Double Blind, including one project that I am working on, which is a guidebook to how to have psychedelic experience. So it's going to be like a gorgeous designed coffee table book on like the Double Blind guide to psychedelics.
Wow, that'll be a great addition to the resources that you provide. Awesome. What is the Double Blind portion? Where did you come up with the title Double Blind, and what does it mean?
Yeah, it was like a nod to the scientific studies that are done in a double blind fashion. But it also has a more philosophical meaning to it. Asking ourselves, like, what are we blind to? Like, what is actually truth, when we take off our blinders or put on our blinders, right? So yeah, that's kind of what it's about.
Yeah, and that's something that all psychedelics provide, which is it's the purpose, right? That we are doing psychedelics is, what do we not know? What are the subconscious stories and things that we're holding back? Because that's pretty much our limitation to life. So that is a very good title. I was thinking it was scientific, like the double blind research, but I'm like, it's not all about research in there. So I need to find out. All right. And so you also have this association with you were at the Jewish Psychedelic Summit. I am not familiar with that. I was going to do some research and thought I would just pick your brain so you could share that.
Yeah, I co-founded Jewish Psychedelic Summit with Natalie Ginsberg from MAPS and Rabbi Zach Kamenetz, who founded an organization called Shefa. It's for Jewish psychedelic support. And that was really sort of giving name and identity to a movement that's already been happening for a long time. And yeah, we brought together thought leaders, rabbis, mystics, people from the community, therapists, whatever, scientists, to talk about, plant medicine's part of biblical, in use during biblical times, or, how are psychedelics helping Jewish trauma, or, why are so many Jews involved in the drug policy movement? Like, how is that part of what we call tikkun olam, or repair the world? Or, of course, there's like the mystical and ritualistic elements of psychedelic and Jewish experience that go really well together. And yeah, looking at Jewish shamanism and all sorts of things. So that was the point of the summit. And we also did an in-person event at the most recent MAPS conference in Colorado this year, and hopefully more to come.
Nice. Oh, so it's actually like an actual conference or event that you go to. So it's an annual event?
So far, it's been like semi-annual, I guess, whatever, that we're every 2 years. Like the first one was in 2021 as a Zoom event, and the second one was this year,
This year.
2020, as an in-person event.
Nice. So every other year. So the next one probably 2025.
Unless we pick up the speed and
All right.
expand out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of work to put together a conference. I saw that this weekend, and I was luckily I didn't really see it in maps, but that was very high and big, very large. I think there was like 12,000 people
Yeah, maps
there.
is huge. Yeah.
Did you speak there?
Yeah, I spoke on a panel about Judaism and psychedelics also. Also, of course, like doing the JPS, Jewish Psychedelic Summit, as its own side event.
Okay. As far as going back to the medicine work that you've done, you've gone to like parties and raves, you've done the spiritual work. Do you have a really like dark or difficult moment when you've done some work with psychedelics that needed additional support or different, additional support in that to integrate that?
And very early on in my psychedelic experiences, like my first couple of trips were total bliss. And so I didn't know that you could have a bad trip. And like I would take psychedelics kind of willy-nilly and not, I knew it was sacred, but I also like didn't think about like, oh, I could, there could be a bad vibe. Like it never occurred to me because I just was so blissed out on them. And then eventually I did have challenging experiences with psychedelics. And, I once been in those loops where I'm like, I'm never coming back from this. I'm going to be high forever, or like just that this, like, I'm going to need therapy for years to come because I just freaking out over, just that I've gotten into moments where I wasn't enjoying the trip or something happened where just like my perspective on it turned and I was like, I don't want to be high anymore. And now I have like at least 6 hours, 6 to 10 to forever, 6 to 10 forever of this. And what do I do? And it's taken a lot of self-inquiry to really break out of that, to really break out of that loop. And it was a loop that came up for a while, when I was like 19, 20. And I actually stopped taking psychedelics, for a few years and kind of came back to it through ayahuasca. I never stopped with MDMA. That's definitely my favorite. And I trust it the most. But yeah, I recognize that like, if you're prone to anxiety, it doesn't always help with anxiety. It could make it worse if you're not with the right people. And, I was definitely like my first acid trip, I went into that loop that I was referring to. I was like, well, I'm just not going to come back. And I think it was like also my friend halfway through the trip was like, oh yeah, by the way, like those tabs are double dipped or some shit like that. And it's like, so I was like, okay, I want to be acid as I think I am. And again, it doesn't really matter. Like I know people who have been on, 10 times that and are totally fine. But for like a young kid, basically, who's tripping on acid for the first time, hear that. And like, it just turned my trip around. I was like, shit, like I'm scared now. And then to calm me down, my friend invited over her boyfriend who said, oh, my first acid trip, I dropped out of school and moved to Santa Cruz. So like, that's like what I thought was going to happen. So yeah, I, definitely set and setting, be with the right people, vet your guide, vet your drugs, all of that are lessons that I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah, so important. Yeah, because that was pretty much the set and setting going in, not necessarily the thoughts or in-depth subconscious messaging that you experienced. It was literally the people you were with and the environment and then getting trapped. And then the LSD that lasts like, 12 hours?
Yeah.
And then you're stuck in that.
Yeah.
Wow. Right at the onset. Hey, you're going to go double in.
It was like while I was peaking, I had a really good first half of that trip. And then like right as we're totally coming up and she's like, by the way, I just turned my trip around.
Wow. Well, I hope she's aware and never does that to anyone else. Or at least don't even mention it to you, right?
Not friends anymore. Not because of that.
Okay.
We got very close after that, but we just lost touch. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Wow. So I was going to ask what your favorite medicine is, but you already answered that with the MDMA. That is a pure love heart opener. So I can see why it seems pretty safe, right? Well, I guess there is a certain dose that there's always love, but.
I mean, look, I also have people close to me. One friend overdosed on water while she was on MDMA.
Oh, yes.
Well, I know someone else who just took way too much by accident and had, I think, like serotonin syndrome. Like it's not like non-toxic the way mushrooms or acid are, but in reasonable doses, it's pretty safe.
Yes. Yeah. That is actually another thing I wanted to bring up with MDMA. It's, you get so thirsty that you want to drink so much water, but it's so important to not just drink water. It has to have electrolytes in it because you can actually flood your cells and have cell bursting seizures, hospital and stuff. I had a friend in college that happened to and went into a coma and actually was in the hospital for a while. I mean, she survived, but that's definitely not an experience that you want to have or give your family that experience as well. So yes, drink electrolyte water if you're ever going to experience with that medication, though I'm not recommending it as it is still illegal. Definitely stay hydrated with electrolytes if you are going to choose that, doing so. So we are nearing the end of our podcast, and I actually want to read it again because I do want to learn more about Judaism because I haven't really experienced it, but your book was such an easy read that it actually just kind of like welcomed it in, and so I am very curious about all the different religious aspects and ceremonies to that. I definitely recommend it to those. This book, if you're looking to feel like spiritually kindled, make peace with where you come from, regardless of what religion it is, the spirituality with psychedelics, this is actually a really, really great book to see that and be exposed to it and how it is, kind of all, actually, even doing research, I see it in different religions, like, oh, what are these symbols? What's this ceremony? You actually see the connection that the current world is trying to hide from us, but it's out there.
Yeah, definitely. Well,
congratulations on your new book. It is available on Amazon and actually just came out right last week.
Yeah, on the 7th.
Oh, congratulations. So you can find that on Amazon. And if you want to learn more and just reach out to all her sources, Double Blind and the other articles that she's been published, we'll put all of her contacts in our bio. So, and this is a wrap. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this week's dose of psychedelic healing. I'm your host, Sonia. Have a beautiful evening.